Welcome in to State of the Nation. It is February 16th. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, Josh Park, Nation Dan, Zach Lang. Everyone is here. We are ready to go, and we are ready to talk about a loss last night that, I don't know. I'm fascinated by this loss last night, and that's where we're going to start with today's episode of State of the Nation. But when they were winning some ugly games, everyone was kind of bitching about it, being like, oh, well, it's just McDavid and Draisaitl carrying them. Like, what's going on? And then the depth players started playing better, and they started getting goaltending, and everyone was going, oh, but it's not sustainable because your big players aren't. It just seems like no matter what happens with the Oilers, people are finding a way to bitch about this hockey team. And last night was an exciting loss, and they weren't going to win 40 in a row to cap off the season here. So for me, I look at that loss last night, and I go, hey, they got 5 on a guy who might be in the running for the Vezina again this year. His numbers have been very good. And they played an exciting game. That's all I can ask for when they lose, is that they keep me entertained. I'll start with you, Nation Dan. Your takeaways from the game last night.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you on the fact that, when we went into this season, people are just, it's so convenient to just forget the fact that we didn't have the cap space to sign everything that we wanted. Sure, we needed goaltending. Sure, we needed defense. And we needed some forwards. We needed some wingers to play with McDavid and Leon. We went out and got those forwards. We weren't able to fill the goaltending need like we wanted to, and so we stopgapped it again with 2 guys that 90% of the time last year gave us a chance to win the hockey game. They have some absolute bull poo games in their repertoire. That's the way it goes. And Smith was fighting the puck last night, but also the team doesn't play solid defense all the time either. When we played the Montreal Canadiens, we absolutely shut down one of the best teams in our division. And then we come out and we play against a team in Winnipeg that's, middle of the division. They're still good. They can still strike. They can play McDavid really well. And we lost a game by 1 goal. It happens. Move on. You throw away the game tape and you move on to the next game and you beat them the next time. It's silly to overreact too much to these wins or to these losses, just like people don't want us to overreact to the wins. So yeah, I don't know. It was pretty average to me. Not good for anybody, not great for anyone, and not that terrible for anyone either. It happens. You move on.
A loss is a loss sometimes. Zach, your takeaways from the game last night?
I mean, obviously you want to see the Oilers come out with a win there, but I think at the end of the day, the Oilers fought and clawed back the entire way, and those defensive mistakes, unfortunately, are still happening for this Oilers team. And that's something they really got to clean up. And they have to an extent, too. Like, let's not forget that only 3 or 4 days ago, the Oilers shut out the Montreal Canadiens, which have been one of the hottest teams in the entire NHL to start the season. So it's definitely there, but we still have these small mistakes that the Oilers are still making. And unfortunately, a team like Winnipeg has the offensive power to capitalize on it, right?
Yeah.
We had the shaky goaltending to start with Mike Smith, and we knew he wasn't going to be a .985 goalie the rest of the way. We knew there was going to be that save percentage regression at some point. So I think the biggest takeaway is that the Oilers fought and clawed as hard as they could to stay in that game. And hey, you know what? They still put up 5 goals against Connor Hellebuyck, who won the Vezina Trophy last year. That's something in and of itself that the Oilers should be taking away from that game.
Josh Park, are you more pissed off, or are you just shrugging off that game last night?
I'm not that mad, frankly. I enjoyed that game. From a fan's perspective, that was a fun game to watch. You never know what you're going to expect going against a really good goaltender in Connor Hellebuyck, but the fact that the Oilers were able to put up a 5 spot against them was encouraging to see that this team still has their goal-scoring prowess. And, it was good to see guys like Ryan Nugent Hopkins a little bit kind of get off the schneid. I've been very critical of him lately, and he performed. He had to start burying them, and he was able to. And then, Alex Chason chipping in, getting on the score sheet. The answer, Chason, that was awesome. But there was parts of that game that you kind of want more. It was good to see Yamamoto get on the score sheet. I thought he kind of struggled a little bit leading up to his goal. And I think one player last night that seemed to be fighting it a little bit was Leon Draisaitl. I don't know what it was. It seems like a lot of the time with him, he just holds the puck for 1 second too long and ends up turning it over. But overall, I'm not going to take too much away from last night's game. Obviously, you'd like to mix in a save every once in a while, but it was just a fun game to watch.
Yeah, we're going to get into the goaltending in just a second, but you brought up Leon Draisaitl, and it's almost like you can't criticize a guy like that because when he's good, he's so good. But there have been a few games this year where you kind of watch him out there, And he does leave you wanting a little bit more. Like, when you compare a shift where Leon Draisaitl's not moving his feet, and, he kind of stands in the middle of the ice and tries to swat down pucks, when you compare that to a shift where he's pissed off and goes, I'm going to skate my hardest, he's like a bulldozer, but he doesn't do it 100% of the time, and that just, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, I find that with Draisaitl, he's the most effective, at least from my perspective, when he's in the offensive zone and, he's battling in the corners, working on the edges. He's able to retrieve pucks well off the boards. But when he's trying to go up the ice and skate through 3 defenders to try to break in himself, I find that's the time that, he'll try to put the puck through a defender's legs or something. And that's when he turns it over. And then that's when the puck gets headed in the other direction. So I think for Draisaitl, a lot of the time it's just holding it for 1 second too long, trying to hold on to it rather than making the easy pass. And like you mentioned, Tyler, it's kind of hard to be critical of a guy that's that skilled. But sometimes I agree with Draisaitl. You just want a little bit more out of him.
If you want to hop in on the show and have a take or ask us a question, we are live on Twitter, we're live on Twitch, we're live on Facebook. I got the Twitter stream and the Twitch stream going. Dan, you're monitoring Facebook. If there's any questions that come our way.
Yeah, I got a comment from John B. Brass who says, "Damn Bouchard and his 10 giveaways last night." What do we think of Bouchard last night?
Evan Bouchard, I said it today on the radio. Evan Bouchard, if he's healthy, should not come out of this Oilers top 6 for 10 years. Like, he's here now. I think he's arrived. Zach?
He's got 4 points in 6 games, and he's playing in his first real NHL action. I mean, what more can you ask for from a rookie defenseman? Sure, yeah. If he had that many giveaways last game, you never want to see that on anybody's sheet, right?
I think he did.
At the end of the day, I'd be surprised if that was the case, but he's looked really solid to start this year, and he really is going to change things for this Oilers defense. He's the guy we've been waiting so long for, and he's finally here. He's finally arrived, and man, he looks really good. So I think there's a lot more good to talk about in Evan Bouchard's game than the bad right now, to say the least.
I mean, hate to disagree with a listener, but of all the things to bitch about from last night's loss, Evan Bouchard is not one of the players to bitch about in last night's loss. I don't get it.
It's Draisaitl, it's and that's the thing, and it's tough, right? Because it's that balance between, there is people that are on Draisaitl all the time for his body language stuff, and they're on him for the little things. And again, like you said, Tyler, you're criticizing the MVP. Yeah. You're saying that there's more that you want from a guy that was the best player in the league, and you know what? Maybe he needs those nights off. But yeah, with Bouchard, for me, he's showing the same poise that Ethan Bear showed us last year. And it's noticeable when teams are keying in on him, for sure, because he's a kid. Well, I mean, he looks like he's a seasoned vet, but he's a kid, and people are putting pressure on him. And man, if he doesn't just skate out of that pressure, let alone make a nice little pass to get out of it, it's impressive to watch. So yeah, I mean, there's places I would go rather than that. And people are saying the same thing on Facebook that Draisaitl looked lazy, and it's just that shitty kind of comment. But it sucks, I think, to have to say it as an Oilers fan, and it makes you feel shitty to have to say it. But there is those points with Draisaitl where you want that extra level.
For the record, I pulled up the game sheet from last night, and Bouchard was credited with 0 giveaways, but he did have 8 shots on net last night. So
was that a team high or game high?
Let's see. It looks like it was a team high for sure. And it was actually a game high too. Yeah, Nugent, Hopkins, and McDavid both had 7 shots. Puljujarvi had 5. Wow. So he was right up there too. Chase on 4 shots on net, which was good to see. He was humming last night.
Reed Watts on Twitter asks if Lagesson was on the ice for practice today. He was not on the ice for practice today. He left that game yesterday, came back, tested something out, wasn't good to go, so he left. The Oilers were running with 5D for a good portion of that game when you factor in the 5-minute fighting major for Darnell Nurse as well. Slate's 97 on Twitch. Cahoon did not have a great night, and Tippett punished him for it. He was practicing with the bottom 6 today. Cahoon didn't. He had a turnover earlier in the third period that was almost identical to his second one that cost them a goal. He just got away with it the first time. That was a rough third period for Cahoon. He was benched. Looks like he might be coming out of the top 6. Is that a move is Tippett jumping too quickly, taking Cahoon out of the top 6, Josh, or do you think it's time for a new look there?
I think that the sword has kind of fallen on Dominic Cahoon in this one. I think one thing that I've noticed the Oilers struggle with, especially on the penalty kill, I know Cahoon's not on the PK, but the Oilers they can't get pucks out of their own end. And a lot of the time that ends up turning over into a goal. And that happened to Cahoon last night. That happened to Yamamoto last night once in his own end when he poke checked it right to Kyle Connor. And I find that, Cahoon, he had a couple game stretch there when all of a sudden we're like, okay, this could be turning in the right direction for the young German. But I think that it might be time for a little bit of a switch. The problem I have with it is I don't want to break up that third line. I really don't want to, but I think if you're going to make a switch, you're going to have to, because you're not going to take anyone off that fourth line and put it on the second line. So it's a matter of not wanting to change the tide for a line that has some really good momentum right now, but also Dominic Cahoon, he's obviously kind of in a rut right now.
Yeah, like I really don't want to break up that third line of Archibald, Kara, and Ennis. And in a way, to steal a line from my friend Lowtide, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit. If you're going to break up that third line that's working so well and giving you some much-needed secondary scoring, just to throw Ennis up in the top six, he's been great, and maybe he deserves that reward of getting to play with Draisaitl. But I just worry that you're going to mess with a winning lineup a little bit too much here.
Yeah, it definitely could be the case. I mean, I think when I look at it, Cahoon has definitely struggled to start the year here. He's only got 5 points in 17 games, and I think there was some expectation that he would be providing a little bit more offense. According to HockeyViz.com, when you isolate his impacts in the offensive and defensive zones, it's really poor this year. With him on the ice, the Oilers' offense is 16% below league average, and with him on the ice defensively, they're 28% worse than league average. So there's definitely some concern in his game, and I think it's time that there is a bit of a mix-up, and Cahoon does get a bit of a demotion, because he's a bit of a quieter player, unlike a guy like Kyler Yamamoto, who you see out there and you notice him every shift. Mm-hmm. I feel like Cahoon kind of disappears a little bit when he's on the ice sometimes, and the fact that he's not producing, if you're going to play in the top six on any NHL team, you need to be producing, and I just don't see that being there for Cahoon right now.
Dan, what do you think?
Well, Kevin Oberg on Facebook just said it, and I agree with him. I thought they played great last night. Giveaways in and around our blue line combined with poor goaltending made the difference. Keep the lines the same and see if they learn from their mistakes. I understand the desire from the coach to want to shake it up on that second line. I think that second line as a whole, all three of those guys had probably one of their worst games this year. Yamamoto for sure was noticeably less than he has been. So I get the sentiment of wanting to change it up, but yeah, I agree with you guys. You can't. That third line is what's stirring the drink right now. That third line is what spurned on this comeback and got the boys fired up again. Got that power play, and then your results showed it. Instead of being out of a game halfway through the game like we should have been or had been in the past, we were right back in it, in the thick of it, going up against again. We can't discredit enough the fact that it was Connor Hellebuck, Vezina winner last year, and we got 5 goals on him, and our goaltending battle, we just lost that one, and so it's those little giveaways that were frustrating, and that's going to kill you as a coach, and kill you in the coach's eyes. But yeah, I don't know if it's time to panic yet with the whole lineup, but I get the sentiment of wanting to move Cahoon around to send that message that the second line has to be better overall.
Well, I think one of the I think one of the interesting things too, when you look at that line, their goal rate is actually not terrible either. Like they're not exactly getting caved in when it comes to goals. Yeah, they're 8-5 at 5-on-5 this year, so they're doing a good job in not allowing those goals scored. But we need that extra kick of offense in that top six, and that's where we're just not quite seeing it, and that's why I think we need to see that bit of a shake up too. So it's hard to say if it's going to work or not, because you want to give these guys time to gel and stuff like that, and I think a 17-game stretch is a pretty long period to give a line like that a look.
If you want to give us your take on the lineup and what changes you would make or think they should make, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, you know how to hop into the comments, let us know. Dan, you mentioned the goaltending in that last Facebook comment, and that's where I want to go next. Koskinen, like Mike Smith gave up one weak one, but there were a couple that he was just totally hung out to dry on. And I didn't even think Mikko Koskinen played too bad. Like he gave up goals on a small amount of shots, but like there was nothing in my opinion that I sat there with Koskinen and went like, that's when he had to have, or that's the reason they lost. I'm on the fence about who I would start tomorrow, but I think I would lean more towards Mikko Koskinen. Zach, who would you go with between the pipes?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think you gotta give a look back to Koskinen at some point here, of course, right? But with Mike Smith, the regression to the mean in terms of his save percentage is something we could have expected, right? We know that he wasn't going to be a 985 goaltender, and he was going to be closer to a 900 the whole way. And last night we saw some of that regression kick in. So, Mike Smith, he's a battler, he's a fighter, he's got all the buzzwords around him, and he's going to want another shot at getting a start. And whenever he comes back in, he'll probably give you some good minutes. But I think you got to go back to Koskinen, given that I think Koskinen looked pretty solid last night, all things considering.
Josh, you going back to Big Mikko, or is it Mike Smith's crease?
I'm going right back to Mike Smith. I think predominantly he's a goalie that bounces back well, and we've seen that from Mike Smith in the past. And I think especially considering the banged up back end that we have right now, it wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing to have Mike Smith in there to help move the puck and kind of relieve the defenseman of some of that thing that they would have to do right now. So I would go back to Mike Smith. I think it's kind of a coin flip on this one, but I like Mike Smith's game, so I'd go back to him.
Dan, where are you going? Mike Smith or Mikko?
I'm with Dylan James Cardinal, who says, do you guys think the move is to get Smith back in the net and letting him rebound? And I just think that's the play right now. Smith, played well before this and had a tough game. You're right, Tyler. Like, some of those goals, you just have to look at them and say, okay, like nice deflection by Wheeler in front of the net on Koskinen. Like deflection goals to me, it's like, half the time you make that save, half the time you don't. It is what it is. They're not superhuman. So yeah, I think you go back to Smith this time. His compete level is going to be at that level. My dogs are also competing below me, if you can hear that.
I can hear it a little bit.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of it. But the chat on Facebook is saying get Gibson in here or try and get Dubnyk. I just saw mention of that as well.
Oh God. Okay, well let's dig into that, because that was the third thing I had going on the topics on the side is. And I've seen it a lot. Go get John Gibson. Give up whatever it takes. For me, if you're like, you're not getting John Gibson for Mikko Koskinen, Caleb Jones, and a third-round pick. Like, you're not packaging together a couple of dimes and getting $1 for it. If you want John Gibson, you're probably going to have to give up Philip Broberg, a first-round pick, and probably Raphael Lavoie as well. Like, I think it takes 2 A-plus pieces and probably a B-plus piece as well to get a goalie like that. So with that being said, I'll come to you first on this one, Josh. Would you give up that kind of package where it's one of the really good young D-men, a first-round pick, and another piece on top of that to get Gibson? Or do you wait till the offseason and see what options are available then?
You know what?
It's hard to part with a piece like Broberg.
Yeah, because we don't know what we have in Broberg yet. We saw him at World Juniors. He moves the puck so well. He's such a smooth skater. And I know this is probably not going to go across well, but if I'm the Oilers and me looking at it as a fan right now, I would do what it takes to get John Gibson. I would. He's I wouldn't say he's young. He's 27 years old, I think. He's got a lot of term left on his contract, but the problem is that if you want John Gibson, you have to move out Mikko Koskinen in the deal. It's only going to work if you do that. You'd have to be able to move out Mikko Koskinen as well. So I know it's painful to say, like, oh, let's already move on from Philip Broberg. Would I want it to be that? No. Would I rather give up a first and maybe a roster player we have right now? Who would it be? I don't know. And then maybe another second-round pick associated with it, maybe. But it would really depend on what it is. But I, for sure, am leaning in the direction that I would do a lot to get John Gibson right now. I would, and I know you're going to disagree with me, Tyler. I know you guys will probably disagree with me as well, but I just think that if you can lock down a goalie now who you can look at and say this guy's going to be here for the next 5 to 6 years, kind of similar to what the Flames just got in Markstrom, yeah, I would be like, why wouldn't we want that? But the payoff obviously is going to be giving up some really big pieces.
Zach, what are you doing? Would you make the big move?
Well, if you're going to make the big move, you got to make the big move now. John Gibson's got 6 years left on his contract, including this one, and he's owed only $6.4 million against the cap every year. That's really, really low for an elite-level goaltender. I think the emergence of Evan Bouchard might make a guy like Philip Broberg maybe a little bit more expendable. Do I love the thought of trading Philip Broberg? No, I don't. But the Oilers have some really solid depth and young depth at that on the back end right now. Gibson's a guy who would change the franchise. He's a career 918 save percentage. He's got a 921 this year, and that's on a not very good Anaheim Ducks team too. Mind that, right? He obviously had a bit of a down year last year, but he's rebounding really, really well here this season. I think you absolutely, if you want to. If Ken Holland wants to take this team from being a good team to a great team, you have to make the big deal. You have to go get a number one goaltender like that. Even looking ahead to the free agent market this year, there's some names out there. Tuukka Rask, but he's old. Jordan Binnington, I don't know if St. Louis is going to let him walk to free agency after the last couple of years he's had. There's nobody else out there really that jumps out as a guy that could be such a difference maker for a team like Edmonton. And that's what Edmonton needs in net right now. Look at what Jacob Markstrom's doing for the Calgary Flames right now. The only reason the Flames are as good as they are is because they have Jacob Markstrom in net right now, right? If we had Jacob Markstrom, we would be a much different looking Edmonton Oilers team right now. So I think it's time to make that big deal and make a move for a guy who could be a franchise a piece in net, and especially with a lower contract too, right? He's only owed just under $2 million more than Koskinen's owed right now, right? And a cheap contract like that for a goaltender allows you to build out the rest of your roster, right? So if I'm Ken Holland, I'm on the phone every single day trying to see what it's going to take to get it done.
Dan, what are you doing? Would you make the big swing for John Gibson if he was truly available?
Well, and that's the issue for me is it's just why would Anaheim give that up? They've got a guy in Gibson that's making $6 million, and he's a guy that could potentially take a really bad Anaheim team with a couple more tweaks in every offseason going forward into a playoff contender. Yeah. I agree, as a guy that's been supporting and defending this tandem, I still make the playoffs with the two goalies of Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith. But if you're serious about competing now, which why wouldn't they be? Having Leon and Connor in their absolute, best time now to strike when the iron's hot, you make that move. But again, I keep coming back to, you look at it in the structure of the contract works. It probably means Nugent Hopkins doesn't come back to this team going forward because you're going to have to fill in holes in other places on this team at a better rate because you are paying that $6 million number for your starting goalie. But I just don't see Anaheim doing it. I just don't. So and then I wonder if a Kemper move is a worthwhile one. You look at Columbus maybe if they continue to fall off again. Whew, easy for me to say. But yeah, if John Gibson's available, I'm willing to give up Broberg. Maybe even Nugent Hopkins getting a rental player back in return. I don't know. It's the time is now to make that change for that kind of a player. But again, I don't think Anaheim's ready to make that move.
If you could get Kemper, I would jump at that. And Columbus is in an interesting spot with expansion too, where, if the Blue Jackets want to give up one of Korpisalo or Merzlikins, I would look long and hard at that. Because if you want to get it, whether it's Kemper, whether it's one of the guys in Columbus, I've even heard some stuff about one of the guys out in Pittsburgh, if they're not happy with both Jarry and DeSmith, I would look at one of those and go, maybe that's a chance to upgrade on who's going to run with Mikko Koskinen and take a chance. Like, all those guys have number one potential as well. You might not need to give up Broberg. It might not even take the first-round pick to get some of those guys. It might be a second-round pick and maybe Dmitry Samorukov or something like that. Like, there might be a package to build around a lesser goalie than John Gibson that's maybe, like you said, Dan, more realistic because it's we don't know for sure that Anaheim's shopping him. I wonder if one of those lower names is maybe a better fit for what the organization here is looking for.
I think I was just gonna say, I think when it comes to it too, you look at the situation. Both the Pittsburgh goalies have struggled this year. Both of the Columbus goalies have really struggled this year. If the Oilers are looking to get a goaltender to build around, wouldn't you want to be trying to get the best one available instead of going again for another maybe mediocre goaltender, right? Yeah. I don't know if I see any of those guys being a major improvement over Mikko Koskinen at this point in time. long run, future building, of course. Obviously, those guys have the age, like a Tristan Jarry, for example, or either of the Columbus goaltenders, right? But I think Edmonton's at a point where they need that elite level goaltender. They need that high end goalie who can win games, who can steal games. Mikko Koskinen isn't doing that. Mike Smith isn't really doing that much, and I don't know if either of the Columbus goalies can really do that for Edmonton. From Anaheim's perspective, they're further away from being a contender than not right now, right? They're in the midst of a rebuild, and obviously, trading your franchise goaltender is never ideal, but at the end of the day, essentially, they'd be getting back 3 first-round picks if you did Lavoie, Broberg, and a first-rounder, right? Yeah. So, I know Lavoie was a second, but he was a pretty early second-round pick, right? And a guy that slid in the draft, too. So, I think it's a pretty enticing package that Anaheim would strongly have to consider.
I think I would do it after us talking about it. I think you're bang on. He makes good money. I'm going to disagree with Dan. I think you could get Gibson, get a cheap backup next year, and probably squeeze Nugent Hopkins in still. I don't think that completely ends that, but I agree. I think I agree with you guys now. I think, it would change the franchise. And John Gibson, he's 27 years old. If Anaheim is actually willing to give him up, then I think you suck it up. The other thing with Broberg, too, and potentially giving him up in a deal like this, again, if you're just tuning in, we are doing nothing but spewing hypothetical trades right now on State of the Nation. But you have Nurse, and if you're serious about keeping Nurse long-term and you think he's your top pairing guy, which he's looking like he is, you have him there. If you think Clefbaum's healthy again, that's a big part of this as well, because then your top 4 is still almost set on the left side, and you can have a Jones or a Samurikov eventually step up into that role, or just keep filling that third pairing with depth guys. Maybe Broberg is more expendable than I'm thinking he is, but it would be something. I have a hard time, though. Is it realistic to expect Holland to swing a move like that in the middle of the season, or do you think we're going to be waiting till the offseason?
Well, hey, the Edmonton Oilers swung and made a big move in 2006 and trading for Dwayne Rollison at the deadline, right? And that was a massive move. Obviously, it was more of a shorter-term deal than a longer-term deal in terms of getting a guy like Gibson. But, those type of deals can and do happen in the NHL, right? And let's not forget, too, the Oilers have almost $26 million in cap space heading into this offseason. And they have some big names to sign, obviously. But I did some math the other day, and even if the Oilers are signing a lot of these guys to smaller contracts, they could still go into free agency with $10 million to spare. So bringing in a guy like Gibson would obviously cut into that and drop it down to the $4 or $5 million range, which is still pretty good heading into free agency. So I don't think it's out of the question.
Interesting shit, man. I think this team's going to look a lot different a year from now when you consider Seattle expansion. Barry and Larson are both free agent. Nugent Hopkins is a big free agent. What are they going to give Kyler Yamamoto? Is that a bridge deal or not? We're going to have no shortage of stuff to talk about over the next 12 months. They got a game coming up Wednesday against the Winnipeg Jets. Josh, you'll have your pregame show. I got my pregame podcast as well for that one. Another piece of content that's going to be coming out on the Nation right away, though, Zach. You think Conor McDavid might be due for quite a run coming up here, and the math might suggest that?
I do, yeah. Obviously, Conor McDavid is the top of the league in scoring right now. He's got 30 points in 17 games. I was doing some looking into some of the underlying numbers surrounding not only McDavid, but also Draisaitl. And there was one thing that really jumped out to me. At 5-on-5 this year, Conor McDavid is shooting 7.69%, which is seriously very low compared to his career average, which is actually double that. Last year, for example, he shot 14.69%. That's a huge difference. And all the while, he's still taking as many shots per hour as he was last year. So in my eyes, I'm actually really seeing that McDavid might be on for a bit of a big tear here. His on-ice shooting percentage is low too. And that's kind of crazy to say when you look at a guy like McDavid, who's been producing so much this year. But he's creating offense differently. His assists are up this year. His assists per hour, too, are up as well. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here. And the North Division could be playing victim to a Conor McDavid scoring spree here.
Josh, it is kind of impressive when you look back at, last night McDavid, and you mentioned Nugent Hopkins. Nugent Hopkins got off the schneid last night, but when those wins against Ottawa, Montreal were happening, McDavid wasn't producing. When you think about the fact that if this team can keep the depth going and get Conor McDavid producing at an elite level, they're going to be, we could just be watching 7-4 games for 2 weeks straight.
Yeah, if you want to be a successful team in the NHL, you have to have one of your bottom six forwards chip in on a night in, night out basis. You got to have a different guy helping roll the boat each and every game. You know, we saw Jujhar Khaira be that guy for a few games. We saw Alex Chason be that last night. And if this Oilers team can continue to hopefully pick up wins, unlike last night, with having those bottom six guys kind of help push this bus rather than McDavid and Draisaitl, I think that can be a huge difference. You know, we saw Draisaitl last night. I was critical of him off the top here. You know, he didn't have a great game, but this team was still one goal away from beating a really good Jets team. So I think that for the Oilers, if you can continue to have this success with your bottom six, I think that could go a long way.
Dan, they going to bounce back tomorrow?
They have to, and they show that they can do it against the Montreals of the world. You play that game like you did in front of Mike Smith against Montreal, and we don't lose a game again this year. The team can play well defensively and score some goals. They don't need to get into these big races with teams. Conor McDavid is going to score goals. That's absolutely correct, and he's become even a little bit handcuffed, I think, by his own predictability of wanting to dish that perfect pass every time. When he starts shooting that puck in those 2-on-1 situations, it's going to be lights out for the other team. So, yeah, I think that this team will win the next game, and I think that we're going to see that Montreal effort become more of the norm. And I don't think we're going to see the big change yet because of it. I think that this team is capable to do what they did again in that stretch of 6 of 8 games. And we'll be able to continue on here and be happy talking about it next week.
It's crazy because he has like 14 shots on goal in the last 2 games, but I still think, like you said, on the 2-on-1s, he could probably be shooting the puck more than he is right now, which is insane. 8 o'clock start tomorrow for Oilers and Jets. That's a good spot to end it here, as we are every Tuesday, live on Twitter, Twitch, and the Oilers Nation Facebook. Thanks for tuning in to State of the Nation. For Josh, Zach, and Dan, I'm Tyler. We'll talk to you again next Tuesday.